The bridge over the Vologda River has 4 spans. Between 1948 and 1973, fog was recorded beneath the 3rd span on 2,847 separate occasions. Beneath the 1st span, 12 occurrences. Beneath the 2nd, 9. Beneath the 4th, 14. The Regional Meteorological Office explained this as a function of riverbed topography, a particular configuration of the channel floor that created localized temperature differentials, producing persistent low fog in that specific zone. The explanation was filed and accepted, and the Meteorological Office moved on to other matters. The Tumen 3 program was created when people who walked into the fog under the 3rd span began coming back different, and when some of them stopped coming back at all. I found the program through a geohydrological anomaly index I was compiling for an academic registry of Soviet-era environmental documentation. The Vologda River system appears in the index 3 times. Twice for legitimate hydrological peculiarities. Once for a classification level flag attached to a regional observation journal entry from 1956 that read, "Fog behavior inconsistent with meteorological model. Refer to specialized division." I pulled the flag. The flag led here. I want to be clear, as I have been clear in other files. I had no personal reason to open this one. I was building an index. The flag was anomalous. Anomalies are what archivists pursue. What I found inside belongs to a river and a bridge and a fog that has been under the same span since before anyone thought to study it. What I found is the record of 8 years of watching a threshold, and of what crossed it, and of who was waiting on the other side, and of what they brought back when they returned. In the 1950s, there was no way to hide what you were studying. Every research program, every field journal, every observation was logged and filed in systems designed to track everything. Today, NordVPN lets you encrypt your internet traffic and browse without leaving traces. Your research, your data, your identity, all protected from surveillance. Check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal on NordVPN. The Tumen 3 program, Fog 3, which implies a Tumen 1, and Tumen 2, whose records I cannot locate, was established in March 1958 under the administrative authority of a Leningrad scientific division, whose affiliation I cannot determine from the documents available to me. Its founding mandate described it as a study of anomalous atmospheric condensation phenomena, with emphasis on spatial persistence and boundary behavior. The language is meteorological, and the science behind it is legitimate. Fog does exhibit spatial persistence, fog does have boundary behavior, and a fog that remains under one bridge span while other spans remain clear is genuinely unusual and worth studying. What the mandate does not describe is what the program found when it started sending people into the fog. The first systematic observations were conducted in the spring of 1958 by a hydrologist named Dr. Antonina Chernova, 38 years old, from the Leningrad Institute of Hydrology. She was the program's first field scientist, and she approached the assignment with the specific thoroughness of a researcher who has been given something unusual to study and intends to characterize it completely before drawing any conclusions. Her field journals from the first season are in the file. They are the record of a careful scientist discovering, over 4 months of careful work, that the thing she is studying is careful in return. Her entry from June 4th, 1958, 3 weeks into her first posting, reads, She wrote in her journal,
I want to document today's observation in detail because it does not fit any framework I have, and I want the lack of fit to be precise rather than vague. I entered the fog under the third span at 1400 hours carrying standard meteorological instruments, thermometer, hygrometer, anemometer, visibility gauge. The instruments function normally at the fog boundary. Once inside, approximately 2 meters from the boundary, the anemometer reading dropped to 0. There was no wind. I checked this twice. Outside the fog on the bridge above me, I could see the water surface upriver moving with the current, indicating at minimum a moderate breeze. Inside the fog at the same moment measured wind, 0. The temperature reading inside was 4 degrees above the external air temperature. The hygrometer showed relative humidity at 94%, which is appropriate for dense fog. What is not appropriate? The fog did not behave as fog at a humidity differential should behave. It did not thin toward the boundary. It did not exhibit the gradient I would expect between the saturated interior and the drier exterior air. The boundary was sharp, not gradual, sharp like a wall of a different material. I stood at the boundary for approximately 10 minutes, 1 foot inside and 1 foot outside, and I could feel the temperature difference against my legs. The fog did not mix with the outside air. The outside air did not enter the fog. They were separate. I have been studying hydrology and atmospheric condensation for 15 years. I have never encountered a fog boundary that behaved like a solid surface. I am going to go back in tomorrow.
She went back in tomorrow, and the next day. For 4 months, she entered the fog daily with her instruments and documented what she found with the precision her training required and the growing unease her training had not prepared her for. What she found, documented across 4 months of field journals, is this. The fog under the third span of the Vologda River Bridge was not meteorological. It had the appearance of fog. Visible water droplets suspended in air, reduced visibility, moisture. It had none of fog's behavior. It did not respond to temperature changes. It did not respond to wind. It did not thin in sunlight. It did not vary seasonally in the way that fog varies. It was present in summer with the same density it showed in winter. It was present in drought conditions and in rain. It occupied the same space, beneath the same span, at roughly the same density, as though the space itself produced it rather than the atmospheric conditions that produce ordinary fog. And it had a boundary you could stand at, 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and feel the difference between 2 separate environments that shared the same geographic location without sharing any of the same physical conditions. By the end of her first season, Chernova had characterized the fog precisely enough to know that it was not fog. She could not characterize what it was instead. Her final journal entry from that first season, September 29, 1958, is different in register from everything preceding it. She wrote in her journal,
I have been inside the fog 47 times over 4 months. I have measurements, I have characterizations, I have a precise technical description of what the boundary does and does not do, of the temperature differential, of the acoustic anomalies inside, of the spatial qualities that do not match the exterior dimensions. I have done what I came to do, which is characterize the thing. What I did not anticipate and have not characterized is what the thing does in return. I want to write this as a technical observation and not as an impression, because impressions are not what this journal is for, but the distinction is difficult. The distinction is, inside the fog I have the consistent and measurable physiological response, elevated heart rate, increased cortisol, heightened sensory attention, associated with being watched. I have measured this. I have ruled out the possibility that it is a response to the physical conditions alone, because the conditions are consistent and the response is not. It is stronger on some entries than others in ways that do not correlate with temperature or humidity or any other variable I have measured. The response correlates with nothing external. It correlates, as far as I can determine, with nothing at all, except that it is always present and it is always the response to being watched. I am documenting this as a finding. I am not certain what category of finding it is. I am going back in tomorrow.
She went back in for 3 more years. The program began sending subjects through the boundary in the autumn of 1958. Not coerced. The consent documentation, which is in the file, describes voluntary participation, and the subjects are described in intake documents as military volunteers, motivated, physically fit, briefed on the scientific objectives of the observation. They were told they would be walking into an area of persistent atmospheric condensation and reporting their experience. They were not told that the experience might not end at the boundary on the way back out. The first 8 subjects entered and returned without incident, slightly disoriented, reporting that the interior of the fog felt spacious in a way the exterior dimensions did not account for, noting that sound behaved unusually inside, but otherwise unaffected. The program's early reports described these entries as successful characterizations of a spatial anomaly. The supervisory notes from Moscow described the results as promising and request continued observation. The 9th subject did not return on schedule. I want to read you the radio exchange between the observation post and the Moscow relay station from the evening of November 4th, 1959, because what it documents is not just an operational incident. It is 2 people who know they are watching something they do not understand, maintaining the language of procedure while the procedure fails around them.
Observation Post Vologda to Relay Moscow. Subject 9 entered the fog boundary at 14:30 hours. As of 17:45, he has not emerged. The fog is undisturbed. There is no sound from inside. We have called into the fog every 30 minutes per protocol. No response. Over. Relay Moscow to Observation Post Vologda. Confirmed. Continue observation. Do not enter the fog. Over. Observation Post Vologda. Understood. I want to note for the record that it has been over 3 hours. Per standard missing person protocol, we would be initiating a search. Our orders are to observe. We are observing. Over. Relay Moscow. Continue observing. Over. Observation Post Vologda. At 2100 hours, Subject 9 has not emerged. It has been 6.5 hours. The fog has not changed. The fog has not produced any sound. I am formally noting my objection to the instruction not to enter. Over. Relay Moscow. Noted. Continue. Over.
Transmission gap. 5 hours and 14 minutes.
Observation Post Vologda. Subject 9 has emerged. Time 02:14. Duration inside 11 hours and 44 minutes. Subject 9 is ambulatory and responsive. He says he was inside for approximately 40 minutes. He says it was light in there. Over. Relay Moscow. Understood. Implement medical protocol. File full report by 0800. Over. Observation Post Vologda. Confirmed. One additional note. When Subject 9 emerged, he was wet. Not fog wet. Wet as though he had been submerged. His clothes are saturated. He says he doesn't know why. Over.
He says it was light in there. 11 hours and 44 minutes by external measure. 40 minutes by his. Light inside a fog under a bridge at night. Wet without explanation. The medical assessment filed the following morning is the second contradiction in this file, and it is the most precise document of the gap between what happened and what could be explained.
The external timeline showed Subject 9 inside the fog for 11 hours and 44 minutes. His medical indicators, core temperature, metabolic markers, hydration levels, gastric content analysis, were consistent with an absence of approximately 38 to 42 minutes. His body had not experienced 11 hours. His body had experienced 40 minutes.
He was inside for 40 minutes. The outside world waited for nearly 12 hours. These facts are both true, and they are not compatible, and the medical officer noted them both in the assessment without attempting to reconcile them, because there was no reconciliation available. Now, I need to tell you what the program understood about the fog after 8 years of watching it. I thought Tumen 3 was studying a spatial anomaly, a localized phenomenon with unusual physical properties, the kind of geological or atmospheric curiosity that occasionally appears in remote locations and resists easy explanation. The early reports describe it this way. The program's framing, for its first few years, treats the fog as a thing that is unusual but ultimately characterizable, a puzzle that enough observation would resolve. I was wrong about what the fog is. The fog is not a phenomenon. The fog is a threshold, and what the program eventually understood, through 8 years of sending subjects through it and documenting what returned, is that the threshold is not symmetrical. On this side, time moves at its normal rate. The fog is visible. The boundary is sharp. 11 hours pass while 40 minutes happen somewhere else. On that side, light apparently. Space that feels larger than its exterior dimensions suggest a different rate of duration. And something else. Something that the psychiatrist's assessments of returning subjects document with a consistency that I find more disturbing than the time differential. Dr. Pyotr Burov, 49 years old, from the Institute of Psychology in Leningrad, joined the program in 1961 and conducted exit assessments of every subject who entered and returned across the program's remaining years. His final consolidated report, filed in 1972, 1 year before the program closed, is the most important document in the file. The central section reads, Burov's consolidated report contains a section that stands apart from the clinical language of the rest of the file. It begins with a statement of methodology, then moves into territory that no psychiatric framework was designed to accommodate.
I want to document a finding that I have been noting individually across 31 subject assessments and that I believe requires consolidated statement. Because individually, each instance could be attributed to the specific psychology of the individual subject, but collectively the pattern is not individual. Every subject who entered the fog and returned describes with varying degrees of clarity the awareness of another presence inside, not a threatening presence. The descriptions consistently characterize it as neutral, attentive, interested, not a visual presence. No subject has described seeing another person or entity inside the fog. A presence apprehended through some other sense that subjects struggle to name, describing it variously as a weight in the air, a sense of being seen, the feeling that something was aware of them and was waiting for them to leave, or waiting for them to stay. I want to be precise about one recurring element. 5 of the 31 subjects, independently and without access to each other's assessments, used the same word to describe the presence. The word is patient. The fog contains something patient. I do not have a clinical framework for this finding. I'm filing it because it is consistent, and because consistency is what gives a finding meaning, even when the finding has no framework.
Patient. 5 subjects, independently, chose the same word for what they found in the fog. The fog contained something patient. Burov's assessment records for individual subjects contain passages that his consolidated report summarizes but cannot fully convey. His notes for Subject 17, a woman, 31 years old, her entry in Year 6 of the program, contain the most detailed description of the interior experience in the entire file.
Subject 17's account, given in 3 separate sessions to allow for full recollection, describes the following. The interior of the fog was light, as all subjects report, with a quality of diffuse illumination she could not attribute to any source. The space felt larger than the exterior span suggested, extending in directions that did not correspond to the bridge's geometry. She did not feel fear. She felt, in her words, that she was in a place that had been waiting for her specifically, not in a welcoming sense, not in a threatening sense, but in the specific sense of preparation. The way a room feels when someone has recently left it, and everything in the room retains the arrangement they left it in. She was not alone inside, but could not describe what she was not alone with. She tried to count how long she was there, and lost count after what she estimated as 30 minutes. Not because time stopped, but because counting felt irrelevant in the way that counting feels irrelevant when you're in the presence of something that operates on a different scale of duration. When she emerged, the external clock showed 9 hours and 11 minutes. She does not believe this. She cannot reconcile the external measure with her internal experience. What she says, and what I want to document precisely. She's not disturbed by the discrepancy. She accepts it as a fact about the fog, rather than about her perception. The fog is on a different time than we are. She went inside the fog's time. She came back to ours. The discrepancy is in the nature of the threshold, not in her mind. She appears to be correct about this. I have no clinical framework for that sentence, and I am writing it anyway.
He was writing it anyway. A psychiatrist trained to measure the reliability of subjective reports, concluding that his subject's account of a threshold between different rates of time was clinically credible. Writing it anyway, because writing it was the only honest response to what he was documenting. Here's the first contradiction. The Regional Meteorological Office's records describe the fog under the third span as a natural phenomenon explained by riverbed topography. The characterization was made in the early 1950s, before the program existed, by meteorologists conducting routine observation. Their explanation is documented in the Standard Atmospheric Registry, and it is the explanation that has governed the public record ever since. The program's internal temperature logs, maintained by Chernova and her successors across 8 years of measurement, show that the fog's temperature is consistently 4 degrees above the surrounding air. This is incompatible with the riverbed topography explanation. The topographic explanation produces fog through a cooling effect. Cold air sinking over a warm water surface, or a temperature inversion caused by terrain. It produces fog that is the same temperature as or cooler than the surrounding air. Fog that is warmer than the surrounding air is produced by an entirely different mechanism, one that requires a heat source within the fog itself. The fog has a heat source. The Meteorological Office's explanation requires there to be no heat source. The public record says one thing about the fog. The program's internal measurements say an incompatible thing about the same fog measured at the same time by instruments of the same quality. The fog under the third span was always the wrong temperature for what it was supposed to be. The Meteorological Office did not find this because they were not measuring inside the boundary. Chernova found it on her third day and documented it, and the program has known it since 1958. Here's the second contradiction. Subject 4, a military volunteer, the program's fourth entry, entered the fog on August 12, 1960. The observation post logged his entry at 9:22. At 20:07, 11 hours later, he emerged. His experience report, filed the following day, described an interior duration of approximately 40 minutes, consistent with the pattern established by Subject 9 and subsequently documented in every other long-duration entry. His medical assessment, conducted within 2 hours of emergence, describes a subject in normal health with metabolic indicators consistent with 40 to 45 minutes of physical activity. This is the expected finding, consistent with all other long-duration subjects. The second part of the assessment, filed as a separate addendum by the examining physician, is the document that broke open this file for me. The physician noted that Subject 4's left hand showed a fresh scar, approximately 8 centimeters long, on the palm. The scar was fully healed, not a new wound. Healed, with the specific tissue characteristics of a scar that is several months to a year old. Subject 4 had no such scar when he entered the fog that morning. The program's pre-entry medical photographs, taken as standard procedure, show his left palm unscared. He entered without the scar. He emerged with a scar that was months old. Here is the third contradiction, the document that should not exist. The Tumen 3 program was formally closed on March 19, 1973. The closing documentation cites completion of observational objectives and reallocation of scientific resources. The fog under the third span is noted as a persistent natural phenomenon requiring no further specialized study. The Vologda Regional Emergency Services log for October 3, 1981, 8 years after the program's closure, contains an entry. Male subject, approximate age 40 to 50, observed entering the fog beneath the third span of the main river bridge at approximately 200 hours. Reported by a witness crossing the bridge. Response team arrived at 2:40. No subject found. Fog undisturbed. Case classified as missing person, presumed drowned. No body was recovered. No identity was established. A man walked into the fog under the third span 8 years after the program that studied that fog was closed and was not found, and the case was closed as a presumed drowning in a body of water where no drowning victim was ever located. The fog is still there. It was there before the program. It was there after. It continues to be there, presumably, under the same span, at 4 degrees above the surrounding air temperature, with its boundary sharp as a wall, patient in whatever patience means for something that has been there since before anyone thought to measure it. The final document in the Tumen 3 file is a photograph. Dated September 14, 1965. Standard program documentation image, a view from the bridge above, looking down at the third span, the fog visible as a dense white mass beneath the span's understructure. The photograph was taken to document the fog's visual characteristics in autumn conditions. There is a figure in the fog, visible through the density, a human silhouette, standing approximately in the center of the fog-bound area. The program's catalog notation identifies the figure as Subject 2, who was inside the fog at the time of the photograph as part of a scheduled entry. Subject 2? The figure is present because the program put it there. In the lower right corner of the photograph, at the riverbank where the fog boundary meets the shore, there is a second figure. Not in the fog. On the bank, outside the boundary, standing still. The figure is looking not at the fog, but at the camera, at the photographer on the bridge above. The program's documentation for the day of the photograph, a complete personnel log, maintained as standard procedure, lists the names of every person present at the observation site on September 14, 1965. The log accounts for the photographer, the observation post personnel, the medical team on standby, Subject 2 inside the fog. It does not account for the figure on the bank. I have compared the figure against every photograph in the program's visual archive. The posture, weight on the right foot, slight turn of the shoulders, head tilted upward toward the camera, is distinctive. I found it once more in a group photograph of program personnel taken in 1962. An observation post officer named Konstantin Rylov, one of the program's long-term field staff, stands in the same posture in the group photograph. Rylov is not the figure on the bank in 1965. The proportions are wrong, the apparent height is wrong, but the posture is identical in the way that certain learned habits are identical. The specific placement of a person who has stood in that position many times and whose body has settled into it as default. I looked up Rylov's personnel file. Previous assignments, before the Tumen 3 program, before the fog was a classified subject at all. Vologda, Regional Hydrometeorology Station, 1948 to 1955. 7 years. He had been observing the Vologda River and its bridge before the anomaly was an anomaly, before anyone with the right equipment had gone inside the boundary to discover what it contained. He had been there since the beginning. I cannot find the figure on the bank in any personnel log, any visitor record, any documentation. I cannot determine who was standing at the fog's boundary in 1965, looking up at the photographer, and not appearing in the list of everyone who was supposed to be there. I can determine that Rylov knew the fog from before it was the fog, from the years when it was just an unusual meteorological observation under the third span of a river bridge in a northern Soviet city. He observed it before the program. He joined the program. He was there for its full span. And his posture, or the posture of someone who stood the way he stood, appears in a photograph taken on a day when the personnel log shows no one standing where the figure stands. The file is closed. The fog is not. I am going to complete my hydrological anomaly index. I am going to note the Vologda River as having a documented spatial anomaly under the third span of the main bridge, classified, referred to specialized archive. I am going to note the cross-reference number and move on. I am not going to note what the fog contains. That is not what an index entry is for. But I have been thinking, since I found this file, about the 1981 emergency services log. A man entering the fog at 2 in the morning, 8 years after the program closed. No identity established. Presumed drowned with no body and no evidence of drowning. A man who walked to a specific bridge at a specific hour and chose the specific span under which something has been patient since before anyone thought to study it. He knew where to go. In 1981, 8 years after the program's closure, he knew exactly which span. I do not know who he was. I do not know if he returned. I know the fog was still there when he arrived. I know the fog was still there when the response team arrived 40 minutes later and found nothing. The response team's log notes that the fog was undisturbed. That is the word used, undisturbed. After a man had walked into it and not returned, the fog was undisturbed. The same word the observation post used when Subject 9 was inside for 11 hours. The fog does not record entries. It does not record absences. It is simply there, under the same span, at the wrong temperature, with its boundary sharp as glass. Whether or not anyone is inside it, or has recently been inside it, or will be inside it again. Patient. That was the word 5 subjects chose, independently, to describe what they found inside. Whatever is there, waiting under the third span of the Vologda River Bridge, has been waiting for a very long time. It is not in a hurry. It has demonstrated, across decades of documented observation, that it can wait far longer than any person can watch.